Good evening, and again, thank you very much for inviting us here. In 2009, a company by the name of Coal of Africa started to mine in an area called Mapungubwe. Mapungubwe is a World Heritage Site. It is, by all accounts, the first civilization in the world located in the border between Botswana, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and South Africa. Mapungubwe is the place of a spiritual heritage. It is the source of understanding our human species. And perhaps most importantly today, it exists on one of the richest coal seams in the country. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this case around Mapungubwe and Coal of Africa. And in doing so, I'm going to speak about three themes that relate to the business and human rights discussion. The first theme is, how do we litigate and how do we lawyer human rights violations that are perpetrated or in which companies are involved? The second question is, what is the role of often the invisible or the silent actor involved in corporate violations, namely the banks, institutional investors, and the financiers? And finally, I'd like to chat about the role player in business and human rights that we often forget to discuss and yet is the most important. And that is the affected communities, comprising not only men, but women and men, children, people living with disabilities, people whose health have been affected. And I'm going to speak about those three themes within the context of what I think is a very exciting but very devastating case of mining. So what was this case? In 2010, we start to hear about this devastating mining company starting to mine around Mapungubwe. It's a mining company, by the way, that is listed on the Australian Stock Exchange. And it begins mining around the Mapungubwe Heritage Site, just on the border of the buffer zone. The buffer zone is there to protect this heritage site, and the mining company sits very close to this buffer zone. And in sitting very close to this buffer zone, they decide to do open cast mining. What is open cast mining? It means it makes the air very dirty. It also means that it makes the water sources very dirty. And the water source in Mapungubwe is the key water source for impoverished communities, poor communities in Zimbabwe, South Africa, and Mozambique. So if the water in Mapungubwe becomes dirty, poor people in three countries cannot use their water. So we decide with great humility that we must stop this mine. And we begin to litigate. But we've got a small problem. As many of you who become lawyers will find, the problem is called reality. What is the problem with reality? The problem with reality is the mine has already started to operate. It hasn't waited. It's got some of its licenses and some of it hasn't got. By the way, it did not apply for some of its licenses because its lawyers advised them it was not necessary. For those of you who are in law school, who are going to become lawyers, know now that you will never be giving that advice. Make that decision for yourself. So they were already mining. By the time we got to court, the judge said, who am I? I'm not going to stop this mining, right? There's a load of money already invested. How do I know it's bad for business? And so the mining continues. But with great humility, we think, not good enough. We're going to continue to litigate as a way of applying pressure on this company to come to the negotiating table. But why would a company bother coming to negotiate with a bunch of academics and civil society actors? Well, because we have to be creative in how we lawyer business and human rights cases. We have to recognize that there are other ways other than the courtroom to compel compliance. So we started to engage with our friends in the media, journalists, and we would just tell them the story about how Coal of Africa was not complying with its water use license, or how it had not even bothered to obtain a license that would generate soil erosion. And every time we released a major media display and a major media story, a very interesting thing would happen. The share price of Coal of Africa would drop. We needed to talk, share price drops, coal starts to sweat, which we like. So Coal of Africa starts to sit around a negotiating table with us. And then we do something that is a twist in the tale. We do something that some of our friends in civil society disagreed with. And we did something that felt very, very strange. We got into bed with Coal of Africa. We said to them, we will monitor your work on this coal mine. We will sit on your Environmental Management Committee, the EMC. And this was the first time, certainly in the history of South Africa, but I believe in the history of the world, where an NGO sat on an Environmental Management Committee. Usually it's government, together with the mining company. And basically it's like two children playing in the sand pit, digging up a little bit of sand, but not making any difference. We insisted on sitting on the EMC. And another interesting thing started to happen. We said, I'm afraid you have to get all the necessary licenses in order to mine. And then we said to the government, I'm afraid that you have granted a license inappropriately. And because we kept on applying this pressure, informed by the best experts in environmental issues, informed by our own knowledge of environmental and human rights law, because we were informed in this way, it became apparent that Coal of Africa did not have enough money to mine in this area lawfully. And by sitting on the EMC, ladies and gentlemen, what we managed to do was the very thing that we set out to do when we were litigating. We stopped the mining because Coal of Africa needed to go and raise more funds, which brings me to the second theme. Why were the original banks and lenders who had provided that money to Coal of Africa not better informed? Well, simply, they had relied on the due diligence of Coal of Africa. Due diligence is a term that you will hear a lot over the next few days, and it very simply means that you will do your homework. You will make sure that there is not going to be harm committed by your project, and in typical corporate language, it means that you will maximize profit. Coal of Africa lied to its investors, and the investors failed to acknowledge the reality and the impact that would occur on affected communities. And they lost a profit. So what should the role of financial institutions be? Mostly, we don't talk about them because they're invisible and they are removed from the actual project. But where you have large-scale infrastructure development, the construction of an oil pipeline, the construction of a dam, the engagement in mining, be sure that behind every mining company is a very serious financial institution. And the financial institution has the ability to be a potential regulator. It's a little bit like your parents giving you pocket money. Yeah? Spend it, but not on sweets. why are the banks not imposing some regulatory condition on the investments in which they are involved? The flip side of this is true. The corollary applies. And what is that flip side? Is it acceptable for a bank to achieve a profit from a project in which there are human rights violations? And the answer there is a resounding no. And part of the business and human rights discussion needs to include holding lenders and financiers accountable for benefiting from and achieving a profit as a result of projects that violate human rights. They are not immune. They are a step removed, but they are not immune. And if they are not going to be immune from accountability, then they have to do more than just listen to the corporation in which they're investing. They also have to realize that there are human beings who are going to be affected by their projects in which they're investing. Which brings me to the third and final theme that I would like to discuss. And that is the question of affected communities. When Mapungubwe was considered by Coal of Africa as an investment, as a place where they would start mining, they promised all sorts of developmental achievements. There would be construction, there would be jobs, there would be development. And these promises turned to be a myth. There were no jobs, certainly not for the communities in the area. There was no development because what happened was people's ability to farm and produce agricultural, even if it's albeit subsistence agriculture in the area, was taken away from them because the land became useless. So it was a myth. But here's the problem that we face. Mapungubwe is one area along a vast coal seam, hundreds and hundreds of kilometers long. What are we going to do? Sue every time a mining company starts mining across the coal seam? Is that really going to benefit the people who are going to be affected by mining? And our view was that this is not the appropriate role for a lawyer. If we're needed, that is going to be necessary. But rather what we decided to do was to take the communities who have not yet been affected by mining, but where we know companies are looking to mine. Take those yet to be affected communities and bring them to talk to our community clients and other communities who have experienced mining, to have a discussion about what mining should look like. Because if I, as a lawyer, how am I doing on time? Okay, have I got time? If I am, as a lawyer, with a full belly, educated children, go into an affected community and say to them, this mining story is a bad idea, don't do it. That has no integrity. None. Because poverty is not to be romanticized. And poverty is not something, as human rights lawyers, that we ever dare judge. Right? So we decided to begin this learning exchange. And we brought communities from an area that has no mining to communities where there is mining. And in our first exchange, the one leader of a community where there is no mining leant down, took a handful of earth contaminated by mining and said, we could never farm this earth. Thus began the first point of knowledge, of remedying knowledge asymmetry, information asymmetry, to balance levels of knowledge. Because at the moment, mining companies, in my example, hold all the information. And if you, as an affected community, do not have any information, you're relying on the mining company to tell you what is going to happen. The lessons have to be learned from community to community. And if we get this right, the community learning exchanges should not happen only in one country. Our communities in Brazil and the communities in China and the communities in India need to be talking to the communities in South Africa and Zimbabwe, because that is the enrichment of community power. So that when a mine does come and says to the community, let us consult, the community says, no, let us negotiate. We have power too. And let us negotiate a concept of mining and profit-making and development that breaks the cycle of poverty, that strengthens the environment and not hurts the environment, and that ensures that the benefits and the profit of business are not there for the few who are already rich. I have no problem with this notion of profit-making, but it cannot be profit-making for the benefit of only one party to mining. And in conclusion, if we think about the mining project, how many role players do you think are involved? How many people are relevant to mining? Well, we've already discussed the banks, the financiers. You pretty much always have to mine with a mining company. You need to discuss it with government. Government is often the custodian of the mineral wealth. But then there are two other entities that you need. You can never mine without these two other entities. The one are called workers. No matter how much mechanization you have, you will always need a worker underground. And last and most definitely not least, you need mine-affected communities. There is not a single instance of large-scale infrastructure development that does not see the establishment of an affected community to support the miners underground and to support the project as a whole. Now, it's been a long time since I did the law of partnership, but I'm pretty sure I recall that if you have 5 parties giving more or less equal value to a project, surely you should get more or less equal benefit from that project. And that's where the power of negotiation and the enrichment of affected communities' negotiating skills is so seminal. This whole thing about the rich getting richer, it ends now. Thank you very much.